Hello, everyone. Welcome to At the Heart of the Matter here with the Colorado Health Foundation this afternoon. We're really excited to spend the next hour and a half with all of you. And we have lots of people scheduled to join us this afternoon. So I'm going to give everyone another couple of minutes to join us and get settled. And as you do that yourselves, please feel free to share in the chat your name and the location that you're Zooming in from this afternoon with us. And before I get too far in talking about using the Zoom chat, I do want to let everyone know there's a little trick to using it for our event this afternoon. So when you use the chat to communicate during this event, you need to make sure that you're selecting the option for everyone in the little drop down in the chat box itself. That's the only way that everyone's going to be able to see what you have to share with us. So again, if you've just joined us, welcome. Welcome to At the Heart of the Matter. We're excited to have all of you with us this afternoon. And when you're settled, please share your name and location in the Zoom chat with us. And again, make sure that you're selecting everyone in the chat box so we can all see who is here with us. And we've got lots and lots of folks already doing so. I'm going to give another 60 seconds or so for people to join on. And if you are feeling ready and you haven't done so yet, please share your name and location in the Zoom chat and make sure that you're selecting everyone in the chat box so that we can see who's with us this afternoon. All right. I'm going to wait till we hit 100, which we're about to hit here in just, I think, maybe like 20 seconds or so. Again, welcome all of you. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our first At the Heart of the Matter event of the year. We are really, really excited to have everyone engaged with us this afternoon. If you haven't already done so, please share your name and location in the Zoom chat. Make sure that you're selecting everyone in the chat box when you're communicating this afternoon. And before we get too far into housekeeping or anything else, I want to take a moment to share with you some information about our commitment to language justice here at the Colorado Health Foundation. I'd like to introduce our partners in that work, Community Language Cooperative. We're joined by Bea and Eitzel this afternoon, and I'm going to turn things over to the CLC team to share some information about language justice as well as the interpretation features. So I'm going to hand things over to you, Bea.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bea. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I'm joined by my colleague, Eitzel Antillon, and we will be your interpreters with the Community Language Cooperative, or the CLC. And we want to thank you, as always, for your commitment to language justice. Language justice means that everyone should be able to listen in and participate in the language of their hearts. To accomplish this today, we'll be using Zoom's simultaneous interpretation function. And when we enable that, you'll see a globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you'll see the more icon with the three little dots. You'll click on either one of these icons and select either English or Spanish as the language of your heart. Please be sure to also mute original audio so that you're only hearing the language that you would prefer. Please remember to speak at a conversational pace so that we are able to provide an accurate rendition of your message. We'll go ahead and repeat this in Spanish, and then we can get started. Hola, buenas tardes a todos y todas. Mi nombre es Bea Torres, mi pronombre es ella, y estoy aquí con mi colega Eitzel Antillon. Nosotras seremos sus intérpretes con la CLC o la Community Language Co-op, y les agradecemos, como siempre, su compromiso con la justicia del lenguaje, lo cual significa que todos y todas tenemos el derecho de hablar en el idioma de nuestro corazón. En un momento se activará la función de interpretación simultánea en Zoom y aparecerá un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Favor de hacer clic en ese icono o en el icono que dice More o más para escoger el idioma de su corazón. También pueden asegurarse de apagar el audio original o mute original audio para poder escuchar en su idioma de corazón. Por favor, hablen en un ritmo de conversación para poder brindar una interpretación precisa de su mensaje. Muchas gracias. Ya comenzaremos. Thank you very much. We can activate interpretation now.
Thank you so much, Bea. Appreciate all of you, all of our partners at Community Language Cooperative. Thank you to you and Eitzel for being with us today. And again, a big welcome to all of you for joining us at, for this afternoon's event. We're really excited to have everyone with us. It looks like we've got almost 300 online. My name is Taryn Fort. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Director of Communications here at the Colorado Health Foundation. I just have some brief opening remarks and housekeeping items to share with everyone before we start the conversation this afternoon. So as we just heard from our CLC partners, just a reminder to choose your preferred language for today's event from the interpretation menu. You should see a small globe icon there on the bottom of your screen, and you can choose the language in which you want to participate in today. We also have closed captioning available, so if you want to access that feature, you can click the up arrow that's next to that closed captioning icon in the Zoom toolbar itself. Then you can select show captions. And then lastly, for today's event, as I've shared with some of you already, we are using the Zoom chat for all communication. So if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have a resource or a link that you want to share with everyone, please use the Zoom chat for that. If you have a technical issue, we're also asking that you share that information in the chat box. The trick to using the chat today, though, is that you do have to select from the drop-down menu. You have to select everyone if you want us to be able to see what you have to share. So just take a moment and just take a look at that Zoom chat so everyone has a good sense of that. And if you haven't shared your name and location with us, please do that as well. I'd like to share just a little bit of information about the Colorado Health Foundation before we get going and tell you all a little bit about what informs and drives our work. We are a statewide philanthropic organization headquartered here in Denver. I'm zooming in from our Denver office right now. And our belief is that health and well-being can be in reach for everyone. And while we're headquartered in Denver, we do work all over the state in every county in Colorado. And we collaborate with organizations and communities across the state to break down the many systemic inequities that stand in the way of our health and well-being. Our work takes a lot of different shapes. Many of you probably know us as a grant maker, which we are, of course, we're a funder. But we also invest in policy advocacy, lots of different types of capacity building, as well as strategic communications and convening, which of course we're engaged in right at this very moment. We also have three cornerstones that drive all of the work that we do. Our first cornerstone is that we do everything with the intent of creating health equity. Our second cornerstone is that we focus on those across the state who have traditionally had less power, privilege, and income, and as a result are less likely to be healthy. And our third cornerstone is that we're community informed in all that we do to advance health equity and racial justice. I'm really excited to introduce our first 2025 virtual event in our At the Heart of the Matter series. This is a series that we started during the pandemic and people have continued to engage in it, so we've continued on with it. Our event today is called Bold Breakthroughs, Shaping Narratives in Shifting Times. This series features our president and CEO, Taryn McNeil-Miller, in conversation with leaders and experts to discuss the impacts of systemic racism on our health and our opportunities in life. And today we're going to be digging deep into how narrative change and the power of stories and effective messaging can help us continue advancing the movement around health equity. Karen is going to be joined today by Dr. Tiffany Manuel, otherwise known as Dr. T, who's the founder and president of TheCaseMade. And Karen will share a little bit more about Dr. T's background. Today's conversation is really intended to build up on Dr. T's 2024 Colorado Health Symposium keynote, where she emphasized the power of engagement, of storytelling, and joy in addressing the challenges that we all care about. Now, as we navigate a new political landscape, Dr. T has returned to talk further with Karen about how leaders can sustain equity efforts through strategic case making, through resolve, and the ability to inspire peers and communities alike. So again, before we start, we're going to be using chat for all communication. Make sure you use the drop-down option that's labeled everyone when you share any thoughts with us. Also, make sure that you choose your preferred language from the interpretation menu. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Taryn McNeil-Miller, our president and CEO.
Thank you, Taryn. Good morning, everyone. Looking at the names and I see lots of friends and organizations that we know. So thank you for being here. I'm going to ask Dr. T to go ahead and come off camera. And I want to do a little formal introduction, but not much, because many of you that were at the symposium got to meet her and see her in action. But let me tell you a little bit about her. And I'm going to start with where she grew up. Dr. T grew up in Detroit, Michigan during one of the most turbulent times in the city's history. And it was that experience that helped shape and drive her life's work. And her life's work is now manifest through an organization called TheCaseMade, which is focused on preparing individuals and organizations with the skills and strategies needed to win hearts, change minds, and grow impact. Now, I'm going to say that again, because Lord knows in this day and time, we need somebody to help prepare us and our organizations with the skills and strategies needed to win hearts, change minds, and grow impact. And Dr. T's work is through to get more buy-in through narrative-centered change, from an abundance standpoint. She is trained as a social scientist in quantitative and qualitative methods, so she is serious. She's passionate about translating her insights from research to practice, which I personally am not the researcher, but I want somebody like Dr. T to take that knowledge and tell me what to do with it, help me understand what to do with it. So she's worked with thousands of change makers. She has a book that many of you heard about when she was there in July last summer at our symposium. That's called TheCaseMade, 10 Powerful Leadership Principles that Win Hearts, Change Minds, and Grow Impact. So welcome, Tiffany, also known as Dr. T.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here with you all.
Yes.
Again, since the summit in the summer.
It's the summer. So Dr. T and I are going to have a conversation. I'm going to try to keep track of the chat. We will not have a formal Q&A session, but as you put in your thoughts and questions, I will try to weave those in to the conversation. And as Taryn said, the trick is the bottom of your screen where it says "to" in the chat box, you have the option of host and panelist or everyone. Pick everyone, because that's the one I'm going to be monitoring. Right, so Dr. T, we had over 700 folks register for this webinar. We've got 300 and something online now. And we asked them as they registered, what do you want to get out of this? And I think the registration probably opened around the day the world started shaking for the rest of us, for most of us that are on this call. So I want to give you some actual quotes of what people said, what they want to get out of this, but they represent themes that were repeated over and over. So here's what you all said you want to hear about. You want to get a better grasp of my story, how to message in this volatile political climate. How do we engage with community through storytelling? How can we create asset-based narratives? How can we inspire action in uncertain times? How do we keep hope and protect ourselves, our families, and our communities while so many are trying to silence us? What are some actionable ideas we can use? And there was also quite a theme around how do we use storytelling and grant writing? How do we monetize this to help fund our organizations? And then finally, there were at least two people, I won't say it was a main theme, there were two people, and because we need a pat on the back every now and then, there were two people that said they just want to hear more from two dynamic women that they saw this summer. So we will take that and we will try to deliver on that.
That's right.
So this summer you talked about your 10 strategies. And so for those who weren't there, can you give us the Cliff Notes versions of the 10 strategies, or the 10 power leadership principles?
Absolutely. And so thank you first of all for inviting me and for having this kind of follow-up conversation, because the moment could not be more ripe for this conversation that we're about to have today. So for those of y'all who are waiting for this conversation, you came to the right place, because we're gonna give it today. So absolutely. So let me just back up in just a little bit before I get to the 10 principles and just say that I am a social scientist by training. I came to this conversation around case making really out of frustration and from a number of different fronts. One, I went to graduate school many moons ago because I thought that if we just had enough data that would signal to folks that the impact of investing in people and communities was just so amazing that they would not be able to deny, right, the importance of the programs and services that we know should be made in communities. And I think we are in a moment today where we are watching the fact that folks are not really caring so much about that data. But I think historically, right, in terms of our data, the data itself won't get us there. And I was searching for, well, what else? Like, if we can demonstrate to you that there is a huge return on investment, people get healthier, stronger, better, all the things that we say that we want for our communities, and that's not enough to make the case for the programs and services and investments in our communities, and what else do we have to do? Like, really. And I would say the good news is there's a lot of great social science for how you do that, but it's not well understood within the social justice movement. So the book Case Made and the work that I do is about bringing that evidence to the work that we're doing in communities. And so from a whole lot of social science we could talk about, we don't have to go over that today. You can pick up the book and look through that. There are 10 principles, right, that are key to our ability to make a strong case for the work we do. You got to get people to have a stake in your success. A lot of folks, when we talk about our work, they don't have a stake in our communities, they don't have a stake in our success, or they don't understand what their stake is. We got to clarify that. Principle 2, you got to get urgency and agency into that conversation. If people don't feel powerful enough, right? They're not bringing their own power to the conversations. They don't feel like they have an impact. If you don't get that into those conversations, they're not coming with you. The third one is you got to remind people about what happens if they sit on the sidelines, right? Remind them that actually you have a stake in this conversation. And if you don't come out, right, we're going to lose a whole lot, and talk about what they lose if they sit on the sidelines. Fourth is navigating those dominant narratives, the stuff that is, we're going to talk a lot about that in our conversation, those big dominant narratives that are tough to get open over, but we have to. Your ability to navigate that in the context of your case making is super duper important. And so I talk in the book about the ways to do that. Fifth, you got to build solutions, like anchor and credential solutions, not problems. We are so good at talking about problems. People know all about the problems, but almost virtually little about the solutions. We got to flip that on its head. So the ability to do that and do that very well, especially using your data, is really helpful. We have to also, the sixth one is making, if there's a villain to our story, the villain is systems that are inequitable, right? The systems that don't have equitable outcomes on the other side of them. Though that's the villain, not a particular person. Although there are lots of folks right now we could probably point to as villains in the story we'd like to tell. The villain that we're really after is systems that don't deliver for us, well, equity in our communities and equity in the systems that we work within. The seventh is you got to tell a bigger story of us. It's not just you and I, it's all of us together. And if we aren't building a bigger sense of we through our storytelling, we are not likely to get folks who don't see a stake in our success to lean forward. The next one, and I'll do these relatively quickly, taking ownership of what our issues are, clarifying our value proposition. So many of the folks on the call today are not-for-profits. Our value proposition is not well understood. When you ask Americans about whether they feel like they've been touched by a not-for-profit today, or do they value the work of not-for-profits, generally speaking, they think highly of it, but they don't know that their lives, right, are being contributed to in all these beneficial ways through the nonprofits in the community. And so it's a huge challenge for us when we need to get their support, right, to elevate the work that we're doing. So clarifying our value proposition to folks is really important. And we don't do that very well in the social justice space or in the not-for-profit space. So we have to lean into that. And then the last one is having a roadmap. How do you get there? It's really hard when we tell people like there's a huge vision for what we want them to, what social justice looks like, and then we can't get there because there's a roadmap. Like the runway may be pretty long, but we were only to pass this little small, Medicaid expansion in the state, or a small little thing here. And they're like, I leaned in for the big thing and you delivered back some little bureaucratic, and so, some little rule change that I don't even know how it affects me. Our ability to tell the story that that's a stop on the larger runway that we have to go through to get to justice is really important. And oftentimes we don't explain that. So we talk about the big thing, and when we don't achieve it, people think that we're not being successful. And so we have to turn that on our head and have people with us. Like this is a down payment on the bigger thing that we're getting to. But let me tell you what the runway looks like so you can follow along on our process or our progress getting there. So those are the 10 principles. I'm happy to talk more about that, but I think, we have gotten our sector to make a stronger case for the affirmative vision of the world we want to see, and to do that effectively.
Thank you for that. I want to start where you ended with the roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
So narrative change, we're all invested in narrative change.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes narrative change can take years.
Yes.
And people are now in the state of mind of, well, we need to do something now.
That's right.
But where I would like you to start, because you outline like the 10 ways we kind of get in our own way
Mm-hmm.
of creating positive narrative change is going to move the needle on inequity.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also stories we tell ourselves that get in the way.
Yeah.
What are some of those stories that we're telling ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a number of things you said in there, Karen, that I would love to unpack a little bit. One is that the reality that narrative change, right, for most of the things that we're talking about, takes time. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think all of us are willing to lean in and do the work. Like we know, like social justice, it takes time to do that. The challenge is that even though narrative change is a long-term process, we got to get stuff done right now. I don't know about you, but most of my family from Detroit, like we need support right now. We need rental relief right now. We need home ownership opportunities right now. We need better healthcare right now. And so that's why I think the case making conversation is particularly important, because narrative is a part of the case making exercise. And so you got to think about whatever is the goal that you're trying to get after. You got to think about, are the narratives that are keeping me from being able to move people to that particular policy issue or move something right now, are they things that are so deeply held that it's going to take another 15 years to get them over that? And so if it's a long-term process, I got to route people around that. I got to get a strategy to pivot around that. Or is it something their set of beliefs that are probably not very deeply held, that I can probably challenge them and on the way to getting right to the thing that I need to get right now? And that's a strategic assessment. It's one of the things we do with a lot of our clients. Are like, here are the things that are stopping you on the narrative runway. Some of these things are not very deeply held. You can probably bust through them pretty quickly. But the bigger ticket issues, you're going to have to navigate around those. And you need a pivot strategy to be able to do that. So this notion about timing is super important. If we have time, I would love to come back to that. But you asked this question about what are some of the narratives right now that we should be talking about, right? Certainly, and let me just give you, I won't give you the specific wording, but I'll tell you certainly the bigger themes. One is always about interdependence, how we work together, need each other, how our systems are interlocking together, our communities are locked together. I need you as much as you need me. We are together in this thing, because I think we are facing a conversation nationally that tries to see our fates as separate. Some folks think that they can survive and thrive without everybody else. And what we're finding very quickly, right? And I'm being a little, I'm trying to mince my words here because I don't want to get too far into a political conversation, but that when you try to hurt one group of people, what happens is you hurt a lot of people along the way. And then you realize, wait, I got to step back, because I didn't realize that in order to hurt you, a whole lot, because we're so interdependent, our economy is interdependent, our social services are interdependent, the way the way we, live, work, and play are all interdependent, that all of this whole longer stream of people get hurt along the way. And now you have to grapple with that. So telling those stories about interdependence, you thought that you were going to hurt LGBTQ and trans folks, but in doing that, you hurt a whole lot of people along the way that are quote unquote your constituents. You thought you were going to hurt people of color, but along the way, all these rural communities across the country are now going to be the beneficiaries of all of the pain, right? Or a whole lot of the pain that you thought you were moving on people of color. You thought you were going to hurt federal workers, but what you don't realize is a whole lot of people in communities along the way, right, are going to suffer because of what you're talking about. And I can give specific examples if folks want those policy examples. But that kind of interdependence, right? You think that you're hurting folks who are on Medicaid by trying to take Medicaid out of the budget. What that's going to do is shut down hospitals in rural areas all over the country with the folks who you thought were voting for you, and now they will not have medical care. So when you start to talk about the interdependence, right, of all of us together, you hurt these folks or try, right? What happens is a whole cascade of other things, right? The vicious cycle, not the virtuous cycle. And our ability to tell that story robustly is important. And we can also tell the opposite story. That's a vicious cycle, but there's also a virtuous cycle. When you help, right, folks who are more vulnerable, a whole lot of other people get helped, right? And we can talk about what that looks like. And so those kinds of stories, I think right now are super duper important, as we have a whole lot of folks who think that they're exacting pain in places that are siloed so much that they can do that without hurting other parts of our communities.
You, if you can see in the chat, you're getting a lot of snaps and yes, and say it loud and speak. And you and I are getting chastised by my team because we are not holding to our resolution to slow down
Yes.
for the interpreters. So we're getting chastised. So we are going to do better. We promise you all we're going to try to do better. But you got two people to speak with their hands and speak fast and are excited. Yes. So we're going to try to bring it in. So how let's take someone who's working in with immigrants, the whole immigration. Mm-hmm. How do they tell the interdependent story?
Absolutely.
In their community, within their community, and with the people outside the community they're trying to influence.
Absolutely. So what's interesting about that is I think there are great examples of folks doing this. It's just that we are not amplifying that enough, right, across a whole range of perspectives. But I think for those of you who read the book, Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us.
Some of us.
She does a fantastic job, right, of this exact conversation. And she talks about it in terms of the solidarity dividend, that you've got to tell the story about the solidarity dividend, which is really a story about interdependence. And she talks about when you look across the country for the communities that have been more open and more welcoming and have higher number of folks who are immigrants to their communities, those are the communities that are growing, right? Where the foot traffic for the businesses is growing, where they're seeing, right, expansions in terms of, right, small businesses and those kinds of things. But when you look at the communities across the country that are slowly dying, right, that they don't have, right, the economic prosperity that they want, a part of what's happening in those places is that they're not growing. They don't have the populations that can grow their economies. And so what she talks about is, listen, this is even if this is a story just about economics, what grows a place is newcomers who are coming in, who are vibrant, have families, are building businesses, and so that conversation that she talks about in The Sum of Us, when she's contrasting who's growing and who's not in terms of shared prosperity, is a great example of that, right? When you just read the way she beautifully articulates that story of interdependence, right? Especially for those folks who are very concerned about economic prosperity, right? That's huge. You want a community that's growing where there's a lot of prosperity? Here's what happens, right? Folks who who are bringing innovation, jobs, who are bringing workers, all the kinds of things, who are bringing culture, who are bringing diversity. Those are the places that are growing. Those are the places that are experiencing the kind of, prosperity that we all hope for our communities. And so that conversation is a fantastic one when we're talking about issues of immigration. The other thing I would say, and this is just, not so much, I want people to take this on, not just so much because it's about economics, but I think just the humanity of who are we in this moment, right? I just think that there has to be the continuation of a conversation about our humanity. Like, who are we as thoughtful people? Are we the people that we said we aspire to be? Right? The folks who are welcoming, like the folks who are building beloved community, the folks who are, a nation of immigrants. Are we that group? Or are we a group that are really vindictive and I think dehumanizing? Now, some of you who are listening will say, well, Dr. T, there is the story and then there is the story. And I know that is true, but I think there has to be a way that we are asking people to rise to the occasion of the bigger story that we have of ourselves, or have tried to have of ourselves, not the story that I think is dehumanizing for lots of folks. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. And I'm going to continue with just this immigration example. If you could say what percentage of the virtuous cycle they should be telling, and what percentage of what was the other word, vicious cycle should they be telling?
Good. Oh, that's an excellent question. Always, 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 always. Did I say always? Always, always. Virtuous cycle first. And not so much from the vantage point that, listen, we're all happier and healthier, but told from the vantage point of the smartest investment that we could make, right, is making sure that folks who are newcomers from wherever they come from, whatever circumstances they come from, are deeply embedded in a beloved community, right? That helps not just the folks who are newcomers, but all of us. It always has. And let me talk about the ways in which that happens, right? So always, always start from the virtuous cycle. What does it look like when we invest in the power and capacity of people, no matter where they come from, no matter what their backgrounds are, no matter how they got to the community? Like, what does that give to all of us? And then the conversation about, and what happens if we don't, right? So when you don't, right, lean into that, here's what happened. And you can see the fallout in our communities, and you can talk about all the negative repercussions that are happening right now, literally across the country. And I want to say one more thing just about that, all the negative repercussions, certainly, but I want us to be able to do that in real language, not in wonky talk. In the social justice movement, we have a tendency of talking in wonky talk language. Well, the social determinants of health and blah, 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 blah. Or, we want to talk about the systemic racism that is affecting the community, is making us, all of that is true. All of that is right. But that's not the stuff that everyday folks, average everyday folks in our country right now understand, or even want to have a conversation about. If you want to invite, and we need to invite more people into this bigger conversation, you got to talk as if you're inviting people into that conversation, right? So whatever language you're using, you should be asking yourself, who's being invited to this conversation based on the way that I'm talking and based on language? And I got to say, I got to commend y'all at the Colorado Health Foundation, just in terms of language justice. You're communicating to people, we're inviting you in, come into this conversation. You are welcome here. That is huge in ways that lots of folks are just starting to understand, right?
I 100% agree with you. I've often said I've never heard a person living with low income use the words social determinants of health, even though they talk about it every day.
That's right.
But when they talk about it, it's, I just can't seem to get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I got more bills than money.
That's right.
It just seems like people are trying to hold me back.
That's right.
They talk about it all the time. They
That's
just
right.
don't use, like you said, the wonky words that we use.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions in the chat from Alex Bernat, I think, or Bernat, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. is how can we build messaging that builds and sustains itself over time? Like just to have a virtuous cycle that goes on and on and on.
Mhm. So I gotta tell you that I'm not sure, and I want to um, redirect that question to just a little bit, because I think that one of the challenges that we have faced, particularly in the social justice space, is this conversation about needing messaging. You don't need a message. You're not. We don't need more messaging, right? In the traditional sense, there are two things we need to do. One is to build community, right, with folks. And the other thing is to think about the energy of the conversations we're having. And let me tell you why I'm reacting that way. And I because I've been parts of shops before that are creating, like, the new messaging framework. Say this, say this, say this, and say that. And they give a whole framework for what you have to say. And you're supposed to go memorize it. And then at the very moment that some reporter asks you about it, or the very moment that you're in community, you're supposed to say it. Let me tell you why that doesn't work. I get the inclination, and I've been part of that in many parts of my career. And because of my experience, I've stepped back from that. First of all, the world is changing so fast that literally by the time the ink has dried on the messaging guide that you get, it's out of date. I mean, think about it. Whatever messaging guide we had sort of the end of 2024, that thing is out of date, because there is a whole different world in front of us. And so now you're looking down at your notes and you're going, wait a minute, I'm supposed to say this, but that has no bearing to what I'm seeing right now in front of me. And so that's not at all what we're talking about. Certainly we can talk about some themes like interdependence. We know whether or not it's 2024 or 2025, you need to have some version of that conversation going. And we know that, but that's not, a very specific statement about that, right? For each thing. So we don't need messaging per se. What we need is, like, what are the ways in which we can pull people forward in a deeper conversation about what we aspire to in our lives. We aspire, right, to have healthy, happy, in the lives you're talking. We aspire to have people be able to pay their bills. We aspire to have people have a sense of prosperity. We aspire to have people feel safe in their communities. We aspire to those things. Speak to those things in whatever language, in whatever way is powerful, right, for you in that moment. And if we do that, that's going to get you a whole lot farther than trying to memorize the thing that this group said you could say, and then there's another messaging guide over here. They said you should say that, and so I talk about that in the CaseMade book. The first part of your journey is to figure out what people's aspirations are. What do they want for their lives? What gets people excited and energized? And it may turn out that the thing that's energizing people, or in the work that you do, or the folks that you want to pull forward, may not have anything to do with the actual policy you're talking about, but you can use one to get you to the other, right? I can give some examples of that, but using the aspirations that people have to move them into a deeper conversation about what the issues are. Let me just give you one example. We were doing some work around homelessness in one particular community, and we're trying to get folks to tell us about kind of what is it about this issue of homelessness that made them feel like they wanted to do something about it. And we were going through the traditional things, like just the moral issues, like who wants to see folks on the street? You want to see people healthy, happy, and right, all the things that we all want for our own lives. And people were like, yeah, we want some of that. And talked about that. But we started to get at people's own aspirations for their own lives. And they started saying things like, you know what? I really want to be able to go to the parks more. And because all of our parks are filled with folks who are unhoused, they don't have a place to go. Those places are not safe for our children to play. Number one, I don't want people to have to live in the parks, but I also want to be able to have public spaces now that I can enjoy with my own family. And so what makes me motivated about helping folks who are unhoused get housed is the need to sort of take back public spaces for all of us. Now, some of you will say, folks should be motivated just by the moral issues, right, of having folks be unhoused to address that issue. But the reality is there are lots of folks who just simply aren't. What motivates them to move to actually help you, right, do the work you need to do around homelessness, maybe that issue. Great. If you love parks and you love public spaces and you want to have those places reserved for the play of your children, the picnics in the park, great. We do too. Help us figure out how to get folks safely housed in spaces where they have services, and you get that back. It's a win-win for all of us, right? So speak to people's aspirations. That's not a messaging guide. That's listening to people in your community tell you what their aspirations are. And when they do, say, great, that can help us get to this other thing, right? And so I hope that's helpful, but I want to
Yeah.
caution people around the sort of messaging advice that they're looking for. The 3x5 card with the 5 magic words on it does not exist. And if I gave you those 5 magic words, they would be out of date by the time we got off the call, literally. Does that make sense?
Yes, and Alex responded, yes, thank you so much. That was the most perfect answer possible. And thank you for thank you for the reframe, he said.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex.
So I want to ask a couple more questions about the case made, and then I want to kind of move to something else. So first question. I'm making an assumption here that of the 10 principles, they are not all equal.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there are 2 or 3 of those principles that people have to get right, what are those 2 or 3?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would say it's the first 3. The first 3, and they're positioned as the first 3 because number one, they're the most important, but also they line up with a lot of the cognitive science about how our brains work and how our energy lines up. So that first one, which I really just actually gave an example of, which is having people figure out that they have a stake in your success is key. If people don't feel like they have a stake in your success, they don't come. They don't lean forward. I don't care what it is. I mean, listen, I always tell people, you listen, you can have Taylor Swift and Beyonce do a joint song together and sing about the policy that you're trying to move. But if they don't feel a stake in what you're doing, it doesn't matter. It could be a number one hit on the charts and it would not matter. It wouldn't move people forward in terms of leaning forward. So having people really get that they have a stake in your success, that the bigger we, is important. That is number one. You got to start there, right? Or nothing else moves. The second one is we are to talk about this as, naming the power of the moment to shape the future. You want to get people positioned like in that future, right? So imagine what Colorado is going to look like in 10 years. Or we have the power to shape that right now. Colorado 15 to 20 years from now is being shaped right now. The policies, the energy, the investments, the services being shaped right now, right? And so this moment, right, is super duper important. Getting people to think like that, right, gives people a sense of urgency and agency in the conversation. Yeah, we got to move right now, not tomorrow, right now. It's super important. And that third one about loss aversion is super duper important. You got to remind people again about what they lose. Like right now, what's happening federally? What happens if we don't lean forward and do something? What happens if we just wait and see how it plays out? Right? You got to tell folks what they're going to lose if they don't get off the sidelines, right? And join the fight in whatever way that they can. For some of us, it's direct action. For some of us, it's letter writing and campaign writing and calling. For others of us, it's active lawsuit, whatever it is, right? You got to get off the sidelines because if you don't, right, we can talk about the consequences of that. So those top 3, getting stake in the conversation, giving a sense of urgency and agency, and then telling people what they lose if they don't join the fight is super important. 1, 2, 3. We call it in our work, we call it the hook. First 3 things, right, out of your mouth. Why you got a stake in it? Urgency of the moment. I got to get right. And then what you lose if you don't support the work that we're trying to get done.
And how hard is it? Let's say, just take it now, where people need to respond now, to this moment.
Mm-hmm.
If they aren't doing those 3 and they log off at 1:30, what do you want that executive director to go do at 1:30? Start doing at 1:35.
Build that hook right away and pushing it out consistent. Now, I would say actually two. I would actually say two things actually. One, not only just build the hook, right, for your team, your staff, or whatever it looks like, and help your staff get that, right? For whatever we do, how do we get people to have a stake in our success as an agency and organization? How do we build urgency around it? How do we make sure that people understand what they lose if they don't support us right now in this moment, right? Because a lot of folks don't really know that. It's, if you think federally right now, not just at the state level, But what you lose, right, if these institutions go down, a whole public health infrastructure is being dismantled. I'm not opposed to the idea that we probably need to dismantle what we had, but if you're not building something in its place that's better, that's the challenge, and that's the part of what's not happening right now. If you don't talk to folks about that, right? What does it mean that our public health infrastructure is being dismantled? Like, what are you losing in this moment? Then people don't have a sense of that. So I would say for that executive director, wherever they are, those building that hook for your organization, your institution right now is critical. And then the fourth thing I would say, or the second thing I would say, after you build that hook, is the pivot. Being able to pivot around, I think, the dominant narratives that are facing us right now. The notion that government is inefficient, the notion that now the nonprofit sector is wasteful and not spending very much, the notion that people are not worthy or deserving of the services that we have. What we often tell folks is not only work on the pivot, and we walk people through like what is the art and science of a pivot, but what we also do is have people pivot together. It's actually stronger if you are in communication either with your team or with other organizations in a coalition, and you're going to pivot together so that you are resetting the narrative in a way that it's positioned together. So I can talk a little bit more about that, but I think those two things: number one, get your hook together with those first three principles of strategic case making, and then second, get your pivot, and as much as you can try to pivot together, right? So you're all saying the same thing, right, with other folks who are in coalition with you.
And that pivot together is connected to a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, which is essentially, what do you do when your community's in conflict, when you've got intra-fighting in your own community?
Oh boy. Oh boy. That's a good one. You got to resolve that. Martin Luther King talked about the work. He said the work is consensus. I mean, when you think about the civil rights movement of the 1960s, there was a whole lot of contention and a whole lot of groups that were not in alignment. I think when we think back to, for example, that period of time when you just had massive demonstrations and a massive sort of a number of people of all religions, races, areas of the country involved in a civil rights movement, I think we think of that as all moving together, all as one. There was a lot of fighting in the background, right? There was a lot going on. Fannie Lou Hamer was fighting with these folks. These folks were fighting with SNCC, and the SNCC were, I mean, there was a whole lot of going on. And a part of it is because people they had different versions of the roadmap we were talking about before, like how we get from here to there, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's an opportunity though in the moment to say we might not all agree with the roadmap for how we get to justice, but we have to stand in alignment with one another. I may not agree with the way the way you're getting at it, but I'm not going to stand in your way, and I'm going to support you as much as I can. And I need you to do the same thing for me, because any advancement that we're making in that direction is probably the right way to go. The way that we often talk about it at TheCaseMade is, listen, we all got a lane, right? Max out your lane. If you're a bank and you're from the banks and you have a different way that you want to engage with community, great. Max out your lane. I don't know that I can sort of, I can do anything in the banking sphere, but if you can, and you've got a way to max it out. If you're in a not-for-profit and you're working with children and family services, max out that lane, do as much as you can. If you are in a government agency and you happen to be one of federal, state, local, doesn't matter, and you're thinking about issues around equity and how we move, max out that lane, right? And so if we think about ourselves as not having to each be in the same lane and doing the exact same thing, but being aligned, right, as each of us is moving toward the justice that we hope to happen, then that creates the opportunity to get up and over some of that disagreement. I don't have to agree with you, you don't have to agree with me, but we're all moving in the same direction toward what we know is a just society. And wherever that finds you, max out your lane, max it out, right? I think of it in terms of that. Anyway, I could certainly say more about that, but I think, that is certainly, it's just that we're all passionate, right, about this moment. How can you not be? But we just have different ways of getting to the roadways to get to the vision of a broader, just society.
Yes. I hope that was helpful for some of you that were asking that question.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to move, you have a new book coming out,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds like it really fits this moment. And there are a lot of folks from the universities on the call. This reads like a dissertation title.
Yes, it is.
So the new book is called Green Lights, Fast Scooters, and Airport Runways, Bending the Arc of Justice Faster. Now, it's the faster part I'm really interested in, and I don't know what the green lights, fast scooters, and airport runways have to do with it. So go ahead and tell us about that, and let us know how we get to faster.
That's right. So here's the thing. The moral arc of the universe, bends towards justice. We just want to bend it a little faster, right? And so I think, for a lot of the work, I see a lot of folks doing narrative change work. A lot of folks are doing organizing on the ground. And a lot of that work is fantastic, but there are also ways a lot of that work is underpowered. And there are ways to supercharge that by leaning into the social science of how we know, right? Those transitions can be made faster. So what I try and do in the book is to talk about how we get there. So the first part of that, green lights, refers to the sort of metaphor that we often use to describe the distinction between narrative change and case making, right? Case making is the bigger destination. I want to make a case for a thing. I want to make a case for universal basic income. I want to make a case for community development health services. I want to make a case for something more reproductive justice or reproductive health, whatever the thing is that you're going after. That's the case that you're making. And narrative, and there's a road to get there, but your narratives are the traffic signals on the way to get there. If you've got narratives that are working in your favor, there's a whole lot of green lights. If you've got a whole lot of societal or dominant narratives that are not working in your favor, right? Individualism, health individual that just are not working well for you, there's a whole lot of red lights. So you don't get to the destination very quickly because you're bumping into all of these dominant narratives that are just keeping you from being able to move forward. And so in the first part of that book, Green Lights, I talk about from a narrative standpoint, how to get through, right? How to get more of those green lights so you actually get to the destination faster. So that's where the metaphor kind of comes from. And I use narratives and storytelling all throughout the book to help people connect the redirections and lessons and actually put into practice some of those redirections that get there faster, right? And I got a whole lot of them. I'm happy to give some examples if people are interested in, but I also know that
Please give some examples.
Sure. So one of the first chapters in the book, I have a chapter in there called Santa. The first chapter, and under the green light section, is called Santa Claus is Real. And all the stories are just kind of interesting stories, but I tell the story in my household. We celebrate the sort of mythology around Santa Claus, and we always have. And when my kids were younger, I mean, we just loved it. We were that family on the street with all the lights and all the streamers and the Santa Claus on the lawn and all the garlands and the huge tree and and we do all of that. We write letters to the North Pole, and we would go to the mall and sit on Santa's lap. And I mean, we just made a whole big production out of it. My kids loved it. The night before, we have the hot chocolate, and we have the cookies for Santa, and we have the carrots out for the reindeer. And my kids go to sleep and they get up the next morning and they're just, oh my God, it's a Santa Claus done this. And so there got to be one year, I think my older son was 8, my younger was 5. And my younger son came home from school and he said, Mom, this kid at school said that Santa Claus is not real. And my younger son sort of looked at his older brother and said, what? Like, it was a whole big thing. And so, I thought, okay, the jig is up. I gotta sit my kids down and tell them that, maybe Santa Claus, this thing that y'all know as Santa Claus, is not really real. So I sent them both on the couch and I said, okay, guys, okay, Santa Claus is really your dad and I. The night of Christmas Eve, we get up, we, get gifts that we know that you all want. We put them under the tree. We drink the chocolate milk, we eat the cookies, we put the carrots back in the refrigerator, but we do all that. And then you all get to experience a wonderful thing when you all wake up. And we do that because we love you and we just wanted you to have this magical, wonderful experience. But yeah, Santa Claus is not real. And so at that moment I stopped because I want to gauge their reaction. And they just kind of sit there for a moment, and then they look at each other, and they look back at me, and they look at each other, and they look back at me. And then almost in unison, they looked at me and said, nope, Santa Claus is real. And they got up and walked away. So I'm sitting on the couch going, I don't know. I don't know what just happened. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, do we play it out? I mean, okay. And that year I would say we put the gifts under the tree, and we went along with the Santa Claus is real and all of that. And so in the book, I talk about that as a major redirection in terms of how we think about things like misinformation, especially in the health space, right? And why people are tethered to misinformation, even in the face of information that we would share, which are facts, right? Why do they, like you just said, Santa Claus is not real. You gave them the full whole facts of the story, and yet they walk away saying Santa Claus is real. And I talk about the reason for that. They weren't holding on to the idea of Santa Claus simply because, right, of the idea of Santa Claus. They didn't want to let go of the whole menagerie around it, the whole production, the going to the mall, the making the cookies, the decorating the tree, the doing the Christmas cards. And I mean, there's a whole production. And so I talk about that often. The reason people are tethered to misinformation and they stay in that misinformation well beyond when the truth of the matter should have been known is because of the community that they've built around it, right? And so unless we're able to create an alternative community around the truth, it won't untether people from the misinformation that they've clung to. And that, right, understanding that gets us to justice faster. When you get that, like the misinformation, even around like vaccines and health and all, it's not that people can't get access to the truth of the information. It's all over the internet too, the truth, right? But the community that people have built up on the talk radio programs, on the, places where there's these conversations about what's happening, they've gotten so wedded to the sort of community around that to acknowledge that truth means they have to give that up, and they're not willing to give up community. For those of us in the social justice space, listen, we know how to build community. We know how to build community. This is what we do, like, right? But we got to build it around the truth so that we untether folks from that information. So that's just one example of a green light. When you know how to do that, it gets you to justice faster because you get to detach people from the misinformation and reattach them to something that's truthful, but also that's wedded to community and move it further. So there are a whole lot of chapters, each one like that starts with the story. Yeah, and talks about that.
So what that brings to mind for me is, like, if you want someone to shift a value or a belief,
Mhm. Yes.
they're not going to shift if the new one is just as good as mine.
Exactly.
Why
Exactly.
go through the effort? You're going to have to show me that it's so much better
That's right.
than what I have now for me to go through the effort and the internal struggle of dropping a belief or a value.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So we've got that untethering. Okay. I'm going to take you back for a moment. There are several questions about when you talked about the pivot, and when communities were in conflict with each other, and you talked about the power of the pivot. And so the question was, is the pivot for people who hold the opposite beliefs, or is it the pivot within the people who hold the same goal?
So the pivot, so it's interesting. So there are two things. One, I think, and let me just clarify. When I was talking about the pivot in terms of the challenges that are facing us as a community, the pivot is to think differently, for example, about the kind of partnerships we're having, think differently a little bit about how we're organizing folks to action. There's also a pivot that happens when you're trying to deal with sort of dominant narratives. A dominant narrative could be that we are, it could be individualism, it could be, that they're the haves and the have-nots, whatever those dominant narratives are, and you want to get around that. A good example is in the housing space where people, that's sort of not in my backyard stuff, or they want to talk about parking. All of a sudden, parking is really important when you want to build affordable housing. It's not important when you want to build luxury condos, right? Nobody comes out and and protests when you want to build luxury condos around parking. So the pivot relative to our narrative change strategy is about how you get up and around the stuff that's just not important. It's when people are trying to just be negative disruptors in a conversation that's really about justice. How do you get around that foolishness, right? So that's a different kind of pivot. What I'm saying is also in this moment, there's also a need for us in our organizations to do a pivot. Sometimes that'll be a pivot in terms of how we're talking about the work, right? Language, many of us are scrubbing our websites to try to address the external environment of what we're facing. There's a pivot that has to be done where we hold on to the thing that we're doing, hold on to our belief in what we're doing, but may need to pivot in terms of language. There's a pivot in terms of the partnerships that we have. We have to think differently about who are our partners a little bit and how we work with them a little differently, right? There's a pivot in terms of that. And that's and so those kinds of issues are in that pivot. So if that wasn't clear, there are two different kind of pivots happening. One that's about narrative change and one that's about the relationships we're building with other organizations. And some of that may be in the example that I gave, even about our lanes, what lane we're in, is pivoting to just the notion that I don't have to agree with you, you don't have to agree with me. But if we're both rocking in the same direction, moving to justice, yeah, we can have aligned action that doesn't mimic each other in exactly the same way. I may not be part of the justice coalition that you're in, but I'm a part of another one, and we're both moving in the same direction. You max out your lane, I'm gonna max out my lane. The way that I see this playing out a lot in our social justice movement is a sort of inside outside conversations. Folks who are inside institutions and have to move a little bit differently than folks who are outside those institutions, and I think can be a lot more strident in their tone about some of these issues. And so that usually is what creates a lot of that friction. But if I know the folks are outside these institutions doing their thing, rock on. I may not be able to say the things that y'all can say, but keep going. And inside this institution, I'm going to say the things that I need to say to be aligned in action, moving in the same direction with you, right? And as long as we respect the fact that our positioning in the conversation, we can look at each other for aligned action and still continue to move the movement forward.
And so in the cases where in community, some organizations are moving this way, and then there's another faction that wants to go that way, is it that they ignore this and just keep going in their direction, or do they try to somehow find an intersection with the opposite faction?
Yeah, I think that has context because it depends on like which direction it depends on what's the axis, right? So if the conversation is about our shared humanity and they're going in a direction that dehumanizes people, we're not going there.
Okay.
Go on, like have at it. But if it is the case that, we are so there are lots of issues in the health space, right? Not everybody's moving in the same direction, but if I know that what you're doing is going to help some folks, even if it's not the thing that I can do. So let me give you just example on homelessness. Let's just take that, like that's a good example. There are lots of approaches to addressing homelessness. The best that we know of is providing, right, supportive housing for folks where they get housing and supports with that. I'm rocking in that direction because I think it's important. There are other folks who are in the space who are saying we need more shelter beds. Like right now, today, we absolutely need just more places or people to put folks, even in the short term, because we can't leave them outside. We got to figure this thing out. There are other folks who are saying, well, I'll take it one further. We can have pods or all kinds of places, right, that are not even shelter beds or shelters, but can be something else. And there's a huge fight across these different groups because they're all vying for different resources, right? And so oftentimes they're at cross purposes, even though they're really not. They're all trying to do the same thing, which is make sure that people get housed, right? And so you can fight about that all day long, right? Or you can say, listen, I may not be rocking in the direction of more shelter beds. My role is supportive housing, but I'm gonna support you in doing that because I know that the work that you're trying to do is to try to get people housed. My priority is going to be focused on this. Let's support each other where we can, but keep rocking in the same direction of finding more positive solutions to homelessness than putting people in jail, right? Which is the alternative, right? The Supreme Court said put them in jail, like right? That you have the right to put folks in jail if they can't find a place to go, even though you won't, even though we don't have a national commitment, right, to folks who are unhoused. So that's an example of that, where folks are not, often we're fighting each other, and we're not really fighting each other. We're all trying to go in the same direction, but we have different approaches to what the solutions are, or what we in our own lane are trying to get done. What I'm saying is maximize your lane, right? Do the best that you can with what you got, and let's keep moving in the same direction. And I think that can help.
Okay, thank you. So when you were talking about case making and narrative change, I want to see if it's as simplistic as this,
Mm-hmm.
that case making is the goal, it's the end,
Yes.
and narrative change is the means.
Yeah. And I think, and there are three things I say in the book. So the three means: narrative change is one. That's the green lights. How do you get better narrative? So, because you get more green lights, right, you can travel faster, right? So narrative change is one. The second part of the book are those fast scooters. So fast scooters, and I chose scooters because scooters are nimble, right? They're adaptive. So at the beginning of this conversation, when I was talking about, you don't want a messaging guide necessarily, because as soon as you talk about the messaging, it's like you've already transitioned over to something else. Like the moment has moved, right? As soon as you start to parrot those 5 sentences. So you want something that's more nimble than that, right? You want the energy of the conversation, things like people's aspirations. You want to be more nimble in the moment. And so that second chapter is about the sort of case making part of it. How do you stay really super nimble as leaders in the space, right? And make the powerful connections and partnerships that are necessary in that moment, right? And so that's the sort of fast scooters that get you there a little faster. And then the last one is talking about airport roommates, but all of that in the service of the goal is the case making. How we get there and how we move, right, in a nimble way is the challenge I think that we're facing. And I don't know that we always understand how to get this thing going faster. like I think we're gonna get there. The question is, do we get there in the next 5 or 10 years, or do we get there in the next 50? I would like to get there sooner rather than later. Most people do. And there's some strategies that can help you to begin to do that, right? Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of comments earlier on in the stream about how do people stay optimistic in this moment? How do they help their communities stay optimistic?
Yeah.
How do they, and these are my words, like keep their own energy flowing in this
Yeah.
moment?
Yeah. I am so glad that you asked that question, because that is really, I think, at the heart, from my vantage point, of case making. Case making is energy work, right? It's energy work. It's shifting people's energy literally in the moment. And I say in the book, The Case Made, that this moment requires a different kind of leadership, right? Leaders who can harness people's energies, right, toward their bigger aspirations. So in every part of those 10 principles, it's energy work, right? What's the energy of the room that I'm walking into, and how do I shift that? And so when we think about how do I shift the energy, you're going to have to, we have an obligation and responsibility, right? To every conversation that we're in, start with an asset-based approach. You got to asset frame every conversation. I don't care. Right now is a really tough time. Lots of folks are challenged by what's happening, but I don't care. Every conversation I'm in, I'm going to talk about, listen, at this moment, the smartest investment we can make is in making sure people have guaranteed income. And let me tell you why. I'm not going to start with how many people are poor. I'm not going to start with how many people are food insecure. I'm not going to start with how many people have housing. I'm not starting there, because that's the stuff that shuts people down. Because, right, it's hard. I mean, like, you all know, when you watch the news, how do you feel? Like, the energy of that interaction, right? It brings you down. It doesn't lift you up. So if we want people to travel with us, let's talk about like green lights and fast scooters. If you want people to travel with you got to give them a reason, like, to be optimistic in the moment. Because, why I'm optimistic, because I think there's so much beauty and poise in our communities. And I'm going to lift that up every day of the week. I don't care what happens. Y'all can do whatever, all this other craziness that's flying around. I don't care. I know the resilience, the strength, the importance of the work that we do. And I'm going to talk about that every place I go, period. End of discussion. We have to do that. We have to do that. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it's tough in a moment like this. And I will say to you, there's some moments where it's really hard and I have to tag somebody else in. Right. And so we have to be mindful of that, right? And be each other's partners in that. If you're in a moment where you're about to go to a meeting or you're about to engage your team or your staff and you can't bring that energy, tag somebody else in. Look, I know I need to go on this meeting. It's going to be a little rough. I just can't bring that. I need to tag somebody in. I need to tag somebody else who can bring that because that determines, right, people's energy when they show up to the work. And they're not going to show up if it feels like, well, this is a losing battle. And I know that's hard. I say some days I have to take a walk around the block about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times to get my energy right, to be able to show up, right, as the powerful, grounded, resilient person my grandmother raised me to be, right?
Agree. And I keep my energy going because I just know that in the end, we always win.
Yes.
In the end,
Hmm.
slavery was abolished. In the
That's
end,
right.
women got the right to vote. In the
That's right.
end, Black folks got the right for equal education. In the end, Cesar
That's right.
Chavez made strides for workers. In the end, I got
That's right.
the right to marry my white husband. In the end, gay marriage was approved. And so, in the end, there
Hmm.
will be a path to citizenship for
That's right.
immigrants. In the end, women will own again the right to control the decisions about their own body. In the end, there will be gender affirming care for
That's
everyone.
right. That's
I
right.
have to move through my life
That's right.
with that belief.
That's right. I think that exactly right. And somebody once said it to me like this. In the end, like this is all gonna work itself out. And if it's not all right, it's not the end.
It's not the end,
Keep
right?
going. Keep
Not,
going.
yeah,
But I think that, like we talked about, the moral arc of the universe is bends towards justice. Historically, we've been getting much more, I think, in favor of the notion of our humanity and what it takes to address that. There are some detours. We have all kind of, things that happen. There have been some detours, but as you said, the movement, the sort of upper progressive movement of life is moving toward, right, what it takes for us to thrive. So in this moment, I'm certainly discouraged by the foolishness that seems to happen, but I know that it's not the end, right? And what pushes me forward is the same thing that pushes you forward, Karen. It's just that I know some folks are not on, I call it being on the right side or right. You're on the wrong side of history.
right.
You're on the wrong side of history, and you need to get on the right side or right. But you know what?
And in the few minutes we have left, I'm going to ask you, given this notion of being on the right side of history, you've got
Mhm.
a body of work going or some thinking going that you're framing as like, the Underground Railroad and
Yeah.
how we use that. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I hope that most people on this call, have some familiarity with the notion of the Underground Railroad. But as the January, the inauguration and all the things that happened since then in this presidential administration began to take form, it occurred to me that there's a lot of good work that we've been doing in community across the country, certainly in Colorado and many places across the country, that we have to figure out a way to protect it. And some of that means taking it literally underground to be able to protect it until we can sort of bring that out. So we are at the CaseMade starting a project that we're calling the Underground Railroad, How the Word Was Passed, which is about how we take some of that work underground, but protect it and also continue to pass the word in our channels for what we're actually doing and why it matters. I don't know if people even know this, but and I would say that the Underground Railroad is a metaphor too, not just for the movement of African Americans, but I would say for lots of oppressed people around the world. We've had to figure out ways of continue to move, liberatory ideas and thoughts, even when it was dangerous to say it out loud. The Underground Railroad specifically speaks to the slavery, right, and the movement of people, right, slowly from the South to the North. But one of the things that happened was the word was passed, right, from word of mouth in all these various interesting ways, so that we understood right? The things that we needed to do to keep ourselves safe and move forward. So the project that we're doing is working with groups and organizations across the country to do that. Sometimes it's working with the language that they're using on their website. Sometimes it's figuring out how to protect the equity facing work that they've been doing and call it, name it something different, right? But we all know what that actually is, right? That's happening, and we can talk about it. So for those folks who want more information about that, I encourage you to go to our website and just sign up for our newsletter. You'll start to hear more of our conversation about what it looks like to have people really involved and invested in an underground railroad, in the infrastructure of being able to protect our work, right? Even when the larger conversation is tough.
And so what would your final words be to these folks, again, who are all in this environment,
Mhm.
who want to do something now, but they want to act now. We want to act now, but we don't want to act now that's something that's discarded. We want to act now that's going to continue to build.
Yeah. So I would just, and I know this may feel counterintuitive to a lot of folks in the moment right now, but I would just say take a moment. Don't react. I mean, I think what a lot of folks who are doing things that are not necessarily healthy for our communities, what they're counting on is a reaction, right? That will react without thinking strategically, without thinking long term. I would say take a moment in your organizations, in your staff meetings, in your coalitions, take a moment, right? To think what is it, right, that we are working on that helps us to solve what the real problem is, what that helps us to move forward together. Let's take a moment. Let's not be on somebody else's timetable, right? Let's be on our own time schedule for what this looks like in our own movement. Because we don't want to let the urgency of this moment make us solve the wrong problem, right? Or move in ways that are not consistent with the health of our communities. So take a moment, right, to think strategically in your organizations and with your partners about how you want to move forward. The second thing I would say is we got to make sure that folks are safe. So whatever you can do, and the Underground Railroad is a part of that conversation. How do we get folks to safety who may be in trouble? We all know that there are lots of populations in this particular moment who are particularly not safe, right? In this moment, how do we act affirmatively right now to make sure that people are safe? That has to be our priority, or has to be a strong priority for our movement. And then third, I would say do the work of adaptive leadership. Figure out what needs to pivot, right? A whole lot that we're doing. We may have to pivot from this to that. As philanthropic organizations, Colorado Health Foundation may have to pivot a little bit. As not-for-profits, we may have to pivot a little bit, right? But be consistent in terms of the work that we know needs to continue to get done, even in the midst of our pivoting, right? So if we would do that, if we would do those three things, I feel like we are in good shape. And as you said, in the end,
In the end, and I would want to take that moment to take this moment now to kind of respond to folks who are asking, so what's the Colorado Health Foundation doing?
Mhm.
And your words were perfect because that's exactly what we're doing. We have taken a moment and tried not to react. And our board meeting is next week. So next week, we're presenting to our board our strategy for reacting in this political climate, reacting to this administration. And we'll get our board's feedback, and then we'll certainly share what that strategy is. But for me, the big two words that we'll be doing is to take a line from law enforcement. Our job in this philanthropic community is to help serve and protect. Help serve communities and help protect communities and the nonprofits that are serving them. And our strategy is kind of rooted, our recommended strategy is kind of rooted in those ideas of serve and protect. We are not backing down at all. We are still straight ahead, trying to even move faster with health equity through racial justice. We are not eliminating the words diversity, equity, and inclusion from our vocabulary. We are not eliminating the words historical disinvestment, historical disenfranchisement, historical oppression. We're not removing those words because those are truths that we want folks to rally behind. That's part of our case making. So I just want folks to know that Colorado Health Foundation is still with you. We want to know what you need in these moments, and to the extent that the resources we have to bring to bear can be of use, we will certainly move in that direction, and while keeping our eye on the North Star. We still want to move in that direction. We may have to slow the pace or mark time for just a minute to get some things done, but we're not coming off the trajectory. So I hope people will continue to work with us as we try to work with you and your communities and lift up their voice. Help you do all those 10 things that Dr. T just talked about, plus, how do we help you get through those green lights or get through those red lights that are in our way and turn them green? Because that's what we see happening is just red light, red light, red light, and installation of even more red lights.
That's right.
Where there's not even an intersection. There's just a red light in the middle of the street.
That's right.
So we are still committed to that.
I love that. And thank you all for standing strong. I know that it's hard for lots of organizations to be able to take that stance in this moment, but the fact that you are doing that is so important. It really is. It just is, right?
So I want to thank you, Tiffany, Dr. T, for joining us. I know I speak for everyone that's on this call. You have been right on time for what we needed. We needed some grounding and to anchor ourselves. And when you anchor yourselves, you know your boundaries. You're not going to just drift off and let every wave just wash your away. You're going to only go so far because you're anchored. And we needed, I think we needed that. And thank all of you who joined us. And we will get the transcript and the video of this out and let you know. And we put Dr. T's new book name in the chat, and it'll be out this spring.
Yes, at the end of May.
At the end of May. So look forward to that. And thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.